The moment Oleander called me a charity case in front of my entire family, he had no idea he was signing his own social death warrant. He thought I was a broke, unemployed loser living off my parents. He was spectacularly, catastrophically wrong. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Hazel. Grab your coffee, because today's story is about the sweetest, most satisfying unmasking I have ever read. We're talking about a man so consumed by his own ego that he publicly humiliated someone at a family dinner. And that someone, she had been quietly building an empire the entire time. Let's set the scene. Our storyteller is a woman named Reverie. Early 30s, sharp mind, even sharper instincts. Reverie had spent the last 3 years building a fully remote consulting firm in the financial technology space. She worked from home, her schedule was flexible, she dressed in hoodies most days. To outsiders, it looked like doing nothing. Reverie was private about her success. She didn't post about it, she didn't brag at family gatherings, she just quietly stacked her wins. Her sister, Calla, was the golden child. Bubbly, social, always the center of attention at every family function. Calla had recently started dating a man named Oleander. Mid-30s, finance bro energy, the kind of guy who wore a watch just to make sure you noticed it. Oleander had a stable corporate job at a mid-level investment firm, a decent salary, and an absolutely monstrous superiority complex. The kind of man who profited from every single interaction. If you weren't, quote, being useful in his eyes, you were not impressive to him. Simple as that. Reverie had met Oleander exactly twice before this infamous dinner. Both times he'd been dismissive. Short answers, minimal eye contact. That particular brand of polite contempt. She hadn't thought much of it. She'd dealt with men like him her entire career. She knew the type perfectly. The family dinner was a semi-annual thing. Both sets of parents, Reverie, Calla, and now Oleander, the new addition to the table, was supposed to be a relaxed Sunday roast situation. Good food, gentle gossip, the usual family rhythm. It was not that. It started innocuously enough. Small talk about the weather, about Calla's new apartment, about Reverie's mum's garden renovation. Then Oleander asked the question, the one that cracked everything open like a fault line under pressure. So, Reverie, what is it you actually do? His tone was curious on the surface, but there was something underneath. A test, an evaluation, Reverie explained calmly. She ran a consulting firm. She worked with Fintech startups on financial modeling, investor relations, and scaling strategy. Oleander blinked, tilted his head slightly. So, you work from home? Like freelance? The word freelance landed like a mild insult wrapped in velvet. Reverie nodded. Essentially, yes. Remotely and independently. That was all Oleander needed. He leaned back in his chair and smiled the smile of a man who had already made up his mind. Ah, so you're between jobs. He said it so casually, so conversationally, like he was just clarifying a minor detail. The table went quiet for exactly 1 second. Then Calla laughed nervously and changed the subject. The moment passed, but Reverie filed it away. Because Reverie was not the kind of woman who reacted in the moment. She was the kind who waited and planned and then executed. Over the next 20 minutes, Oleander's comments escalated with each glass of wine. Little jabs, wrapped in humor, lobbed across the table. He made a comment about how some people prefer the freedom of unemployment. He laughed. His laugh was the worst part. He said something about how not everyone is cut out for the corporate grind, while looking directly at Reverie with theatrical sympathy. He mentioned, casually, that Calla was lucky to have found someone stable, as if Reverie's lifestyle was a cautionary tale sitting right there at the dinner table. And then came the moment. The line that crossed from passive aggression into full, public humiliation. Oleander raised his wineglass and said, "Well, I think it's lovely that your parents can still support you, Reverie. Family safety nets are so important." Dead silence. Reverie's mother's fork stopped mid-air. Her father set down his glass very, very slowly. Calla said Oleander in a tight, warning voice, but the damage was already scorched into the room's atmosphere. Reverie looked at Oleander for a long, measured moment. She smiled. Soft and controlled and absolutely terrifying in hindsight. "That's a really sweet thought," she said. And she moved on. She refilled her water. She asked her mum about the garden. Oleander interpreted her calm as defeat, as embarrassment. He had no idea he'd just triggered a countdown clock. After dinner, while Calla and Oleander were in the kitchen, Reverie's father put his hand on her arm. "Don't let that pompous fool get to you, sweetheart." Reverie smiled at her dad with genuine warmth. "Dad, I promise you, I am completely fine." And she was, because Reverie already knew something Oleander didn't. The next family gathering was in 4 weeks, and she had 4 weeks to prepare. Now, here is where this story becomes genuinely brilliant, because Reverie didn't plot revenge in the traditional dramatic sense. She simply decided it was time to stop being private, strategically, publicly. At the next family dinner, she called her accountant the next morning and asked for a 1-page summary document. Revenue, client roster highlights, year-over-year growth. She called 2 of her most prominent clients and casually mentioned she might be referencing their partnership in a personal context. Both said, "Absolutely, of course." She reached out to a journalist contact at a Fintech trade publication who had been wanting to profile her company for months. She said yes. Finally. She didn't change her wardrobe. She didn't buy a fancy car. She didn't do anything loud or obvious. She just let reality load itself. The profile published 3 weeks later. It was titled something along the lines of "The Quiet Disruptors, Boutique Fintech Consultants, Reshaping Early-Stage Investment Strategy." Reverie's firm was featured prominently. They cited her annual revenue. It was a number with multiple commas in it. A very healthy number. The article circulated in financial circles, LinkedIn shares, industry newsletters, a repost by a venture capital firm she'd worked with. And here is the detail that makes this story sing. Oleander worked in finance. His colleagues read Fintech trade publications. His world was small and interconnected. Reverie didn't send Oleander the article. She didn't text Calla about it. She just existed, publicly, in a space Oleander apparently frequented. The second family dinner arrived. It was a birthday celebration for Reverie's mother. Same cast of characters, same dining room table. Oleander arrived, and something was different in his posture. The casual arrogance had a small, almost invisible crack in it. He shook Reverie's hand, properly, with both eyes making actual contact this time. "Reverie, good to see you." She smiled. "Oleander, how was your week?" He cleared his throat. "Actually, interesting week. I came across an article in the Fintech Quarterly Roundup." Reverie tilted her head, the picture of polite curiosity. "Your firm was featured," he said. He said it quietly, almost carefully, like the words themselves had edges he was trying not to cut himself on. "Oh, that piece. Yes, Reverie said pleasantly. "It came out a couple weeks ago. Would you like some sparkling water?" She turned to the drinks table. She did not make it a moment. She did not rub it in. She did not need to. Because Oleander was now doing all the internal suffering entirely on his own. No assistance required from Reverie whatsoever. During dinner, the dynamic had fully, completely, and irreversibly rotated on its axis. Oleander was quiet, measured. He asked Reverie thoughtful questions about her work. Real questions. What does the client acquisition process look like for your firm? How do you structure retainer versus project-based contracts? And Reverie answered generously, professionally, without a single ounce of smugness, which was honestly the most devastating power move possible. Haller watched this transformation with wide eyes and later texted Reverie, "What on earth happened? He literally researched you. He kept mentioning your firm to his colleague on the phone today." Reverie replied with a single coffee cup emoji. And nothing else. Because she had nothing to prove, and everything had already been proven. But the final perfect coda came 3 weeks later. Oleander emailed Reverie. A professional email, formal, in structure. He said he had a startup client who needed exactly the kind of financial modeling and investor relations consulting that Reverie's firm specialized in. He asked if she'd be open to a referral conversation. He said, and this is a direct quote from the post, "I think your expertise would be genuinely invaluable to them." Precious indeed from the man who once saw her as someone who required guidance at her family's dining table. Reverie responded professionally. She scheduled a call, she assessed the startup, she onboarded them as a client, she billed at her standard rate, which, for context, was not a small number. Oleander had personally created a situation where he was now effectively feeding revenue into the, quote, unemployed charity cases business. The karma here is so tightly coiled it almost hurts to look at directly. He mocked her. She said nothing. Reality corrected him. And then he paid her. That, my friends, is not just a glow-up story. That is a masterclass in dignity, patience, and the long game of letting your work speak for itself. Okay, let's pour another cup of coffee because I want to break this down psychologically because there is so much to unpack here. Let's start with Oleander. Because men like Oleander are fascinating in the most frustrating way imaginable. Oleander exhibits what psychologists describe as status threat aggression. He wasn't randomly cruel, he was strategically cruel towards someone he perceived as lower status. The flexible schedule, the home office, the lack of visible corporate markers, the title, the commute, the office building. These read as failure to his metric system. He operates in a world where worth is externally validated. The job title, the firm name, the watch, the salary band. Without those visible markers, you don't register. This is an extraordinarily limited and fragile way to assess human value, because the second those markers shift, his entire worldview has to be renegotiated. And renegotiating your worldview is deeply uncomfortable. Which is exactly why Oleander went so quiet at that second dinner. He wasn't just embarrassed, he was destabilized. His entire framework for ranking people had produced a catastrophically wrong output, and he couldn't trust his own assessment anymore. That's the real damage Reverie did, not to his reputation, to his certainty, to his confidence in his own ability to read a room. Now let's talk about Reverie, because she is the real subject of study here, and she did everything right. First, she didn't react in the moment. This is harder than it sounds. When someone publicly humiliates you, every nerve ending screams to defend yourself. She didn't. Why? Because she understood something fundamental. Defending yourself to someone who has already dismissed you doesn't work. It just gives them the argument they want. Second, she didn't change herself for him. She didn't dress differently. She didn't walk in with printed proof of her bank balance. She just let the world reflect her reality. There's an enormous difference between proving yourself and simply being yourself so loudly that the truth becomes undeniable. Reverie did the second thing. That's wisdom. Third, she treated him generously after the fact. She didn't freeze him out. She didn't make Calla choose. She answered his questions. She took his referral. This is actually the most psychologically sophisticated move of all, because generosity after humiliation doesn't communicate weakness. It communicates power. It says, "What you said had no impact on who I am. I don't need to punish you, because you're not significant enough to warrant the energy of punishment." That is a level of self-assurance that takes years to build. And Reverie had clearly built it, probably through years of being underestimated in boardrooms and on calls and at tables exactly like that one. There's also something worth noting about Calla's role in this, because Calla isn't a villain, but she's not entirely neutral either. She laughed nervously at Oleander's first comment. She switched the subject instead of shutting him down. That's a failure of loyalty, even if it was an anxious, unintentional one. It's a reminder that sometimes the people who love us are still capable of letting us down in small, significant ways when they're focused on keeping the peace. And keeping the peace at someone else's expense is not actually peace. It's just silence with collateral damage. What would I have wanted Calla to do? Speak up the first time. Oleander, that's not accurate and it's not funny. Just that, just once. It would have mattered. But Reverie didn't need Calla to defend her. And that's the real victory, isn't it? She didn't need anyone to defend her, because she knew who she was. This story is ultimately about the gap between perception and reality, and who suffers when that gap closes. Oleander constructed a false version of Reverie in his head. That false version was comfortable and easy to dismiss. The real Reverie was neither of those things. And the moment reality walked through the door with a trade publication profile and a client list, that comfortable false version collapsed. The lesson? Build in silence. Let the work accumulate. Because a foundation built quietly is still a foundation. And one day, the building becomes visible. The other lesson? The people who dismiss you most confidently are often the people who will need you most embarrassingly. It's almost a rule at this point. Reverie handled it with more grace than most of us could have managed. And that grace is what made the whole thing so quietly, perfectly devastating. She didn't need the last word. She had the last invoice. So I want to ask you guys, have you ever been publicly underestimated by someone who later had to eat their words completely? How did you handle it? Drop your story in the comments because I genuinely want to read every single one of them. And if you love this kind of deeply satisfying, brilliantly analyzed drama content, hit that subscribe button. I post twice a week and I promise it only gets better from here.